Hello, this is Angelica here for Creative Careers Leadership Lab, workshop number 3 for design for our project, Designing a Movie Poster. What we'll be covering in this workshop will be practicing and revising. So we'll be talking a little about bringing your elements together for a final product. However, we're also going to be talking about variation and making sure that you create more than one version, because this is very important when you're working as a graphic designer, that you never rely just on one version. We're also going to cover fonts and typography today as the final sort of addition to your poster. And of course, we'll be covering the submission procedures. Just a reminder of the challenge requirements. There's also an evaluation rubric linked here as well, so you can get the best grade. So let's get right into fonts and typography, finding the right type of font for your poster. A few things that you need to consider for a movie poster. I mean, we covered what the goal of the poster is, which is to attract an audience and to communicate to an audience what the movie is about. So when you're looking at the kind of text that you're going to put onto the poster, and you're looking at the kind of typography, those are like the fonts, basically the styles of the letters, you have to consider that this could be a style that's going to be used for the branding. And what I mean by branding is like the merchandise that might be associated with the movie. It's got to be readable. It has to be easy to read. That's all that means, readable. And you want to also have it convey a sense of the genre. So you want to, again, communicate what kind of movie it's going to be. So different fonts and different typefaces and typesettings, they all speak to a viewer and let a viewer know what kind of movie this is. And sometimes these fonts, a lot of times they used to be just designed by the graphic designer. They become kind of iconic, like the Star Wars font is just, you see it, and even if it didn't say Star Wars, you would know what it's connected to, right? So you don't have to necessarily design your own font. I'm going to show you some ways that you can look through the myriad fonts you can find on the internet and ways that you can import that into your project. Now, I'm not going to play this video, but it would be helpful for you to take a look at this. It's a really cool video about how one font kind of got overused in movie posters. And so it's a great way for you to consider like what a font can really do to make a movie more popular, or to make it understood what kind of movie that is going to be to an audience. And that is using the font Trajan, which has been used in movie posters for a couple of decades now. I also want you to check out these YouTube videos. They're from a channel called Poster Grind, and they have some great suggestions for fonts that you could use depending on the genre of the movie, the type of the movie you're going to make. So considering that you are all making different movies, some of you might be having horror movies, some of you might be using romance. What these videos do is it breaks down fonts that were used in popular posters and sort of why those fonts work for those posters. So for your purposes, after you've already kind of considered what kind of font, or you might have an idea of the title of what kind of text you want on your poster, and maybe after looking through those videos and getting an idea of the impact that fonts can have, now I want you to go out and find some fonts. The main source that you can find fonts is Google Fonts. It's a great website. It's free and open source. That means you can just use it. You don't have to worry about the font. You don't have to pay for it. You search them by categories. Categories for fonts are kind of particular. There's certain terminology for fonts like serif or sans serif. The serif is like the little like edge on the end of a letter. Some fonts have them, some fonts don't. So you might want to learn a little bit about what those mean, or just scroll through it and kind of see what they have in common with each other. What's really cool about Google Fonts is that you can actually find a whole page of articles and tips for typography. So again, if you're still undecided about what kind of font you want to use, and go ahead and take a look at those articles and those tips about what fonts communicate the right idea. Dafont.com is also a really good resource for fonts. And what's really cool about Dafont.com is that it has a whole page on instructions on how to download the fonts. So if you're a little bit unsure about how to install it, then depending on what kind of computer you have, they got you. They can walk you through that process. Also, what's cool about Dafont is that you can search by theme. So unlike Google Fonts, where you're searching by the type of font, that's a very particular vocabulary that a graphic designer would know. If you're just trying to find, like, say, a Western, like maybe your movie's a Western, you want a font that looks good for a Western, then you could just look up Western. Now, unlike Google Fonts, there are different licensings. And remember last time I kind of covered license a little bit, right? But those are what the creator, the rules that the creator made for how you can use a font and if they need to be credited or things like that. So when you click on the font for Dafont.com, you can actually find out what exactly the author's allows for you to use. Maybe they want to be credited, maybe they don't. And then if you're using Pixlr, there are fonts already in Pixlr. So at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually go to Pixlr and show you how you can install a font, like download a font and install it onto Pixlr so that you can just use whatever font you want, whatever font you find. So I'm going to stop sharing. And let me go ahead and open up my Pixlr window. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to show you a poster I've been working on. So I've been working on a few different poster variations for you so that you get a sense of like what the process is. You recall last time I was talking about how I wanted you to combine two images. So you can get like a background image and you can get a foreground image that would include the characters as well. So I've already done that. I've already kind of found like a way to combine those. I've added some fonts here, and I'll talk about what this text means. But let me just go ahead and show you what you would be doing here. You can add a font on Pixlr. If you're using Pixlr E, you can add it just by going to the text right here, this button, this T. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this. Hide this layer. I'm going to add a new layer. Adding as a text layer. And I'm going to go to font right here. And I'm going to take a look at the different fonts that I could use. Might help if I actually went and moved this layer up to the top where I want it. And you can see how right away it shows me what those fonts look like. By default, by the way, this is a little graphic design thing. Most programs will give you text, like a sample text, so you can see exactly what those words look like. What you're seeing is actually just kind of gibberish Latin. So it's just there just so you can see what the font looks like. If you're using Pixlr, most of these fonts are free. However, if they have this little yellowish orange box to it, next to it, then you have to actually get the more advanced version of Pixlr. So you might not be able to use those. But if you see right here, it says add local font. And if you've already downloaded a font from Google or from DaFont, then you can just wherever that ended up downloading, whatever folder on your computer that is, you can just go right here to add local font, and that will open up the folder on your computer, and you could click on the font file, and then right away it'll make it that font. You'll be able to see it. All right, so I'll stop sharing there. For anyone using Photoshop, it's a similar process. You will be you'll actually just follow the instructions. When you download the font, you'll just follow the instructions that come with the font file. There's actually just like a note, like some text that you'll read, and then you'll install it, and right away it'll be in Photoshop. You'll be able to see where the text is. Okay, back to our presentation. I hope you really explore as many fonts as you can and take a look at what you can do with them. Remember that when you're looking at variations, that is actually going to be a great place to come up with some different ideas. Now, as to the text you're going to write, there's some certain legal requirements that have to come into the text, like the credits and so forth. So all that skinny font on the bottom, that is that's going to be the studio name, the producer name, and so forth. The cast and crew, there's a certain order that it has to be in. So that's something I'm going to help you out with right now. It's going to be production, the cast, the crew, the producers, the writers, and then the director is at the end. Not because the director is the least important, but because there are actually kind of the most important. Like, that's the last thing you read, so that's what you remember the most. In the slide deck that you're going to receive, there's a link to a website that actually breaks down all of the legal requirements, including the order that, for example, the crew would be in, because there's a lot of crew, the costumes, the editor, and so forth. So all of that can be broken down for you. Now, there was also templates that you can download if you don't want to write all of this out. There's actually templates you can download that will kind of do this for you automatically. Now you're probably wondering, well, I made up this movie in my head, so what am I going to put? Who's the production company? Who's the producer? Who's the actor? And this is where I want you to be as creative and as fun as you can be. So you could put down, for example, the production company might be the name of your pet, the street you live on, or something like that. The people, the actors could be your family and friends. You know, just think about all the people you know. They could be made up names. I mean, just as long as you obviously stay school appropriate. So if you go back, I'm going to take us back to my sample, my demo that I was showing you. We come back here, and I'm going to show you another variation that I did. So I told you how I came up with the title of the movie from a line in a song that I like. The tag right here is also lyrics from that song. But who are Manuela Vargas and Francisco Briz? Those were my grandparents. So I just said, all right, I'll just use some family names. So maybe you have a friend or something like that. Try to get the permission first, of course. Okay. Also another thing, I actually want to come back to that layout. So typically with movie posters, the actors are at the top and the title's near the bottom. So we're kind of just very used to, as viewers, just kind of seeing the title at the bottom. when you put the title at the top. Some movie posters have done that, but that is actually a practice more often seen in book covers. So for big Hollywood movies, the actor's name is usually at the top because that is the appeal of the movie. Is for most people, it would be who's in the movie. I want to see this actor. I want to see my favorite actor in the movie. And the title's not really that important unless it's a big franchise movie like Star Wars, and maybe you want to see the title. But the common practice for movie poster layouts is to have the actors at the top. You might have a tagline with small text somewhere in the center, and then the title at the bottom. And this is often a legal requirement as well. Very, very big famous actors with a lot of power in the industry will actually require, will put it in their contracts that the studio legally has to put their name above the title. And sometimes they'll even have in their contracts, like, I have to have top billing, which means my name goes above all the other actors. And it might not even have anything to do with how big the role the actor plays. There's actually a lot of famous examples of actors who were actually playing a supporting role in the movie, but because they were the most famous actor in the movie, they got top billing. They were the first name that you read. There's actually a lot of famous examples of that. So keeping in mind that you're just kind of putting in names as you want. And you can make it up in your head who's a bigger actor, or who's the star of the movie, or why this happened. But just a little fact, a little tidbit for you to consider if you ever want to go into the movie poster world, if you ever want to be a graphic designer and do this for a living, there are requirements you have to follow. You can't just be completely doing it the way that you want. You have to consider all of these legal requirements. Just like you do with the credits. Those are also legal requirements. I'm not going to have you worry too much about these little logos right here. I don't think that's really necessary, but these are logos you often see it. They're just whatever company was associated with those movies. Like, for example, THX is a sound company that they that often does the sound editing for movies. There's another video here that you might want to take a look at, and it talks about those legal requirements, especially why movie poster names never line up with the actors' pictures. And that again goes to who gets top billing, but then also who's the lead actor in the movie, and why would they be in front of the other actors? So that's why sometimes they don't line up. It's a very, very fascinating video. I hope you like it. Quick question. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at variations now. So a few things that you could look at for making the 3 versions that I would like for you to make. They don't have to be that different, but it's nice to see like a little bit of a difference. So you could look again at the different fonts. You can see how I use these two share the same font, but they have a different color scheme here. Over here on the right, I used a very different font. You could also consider cropping alternatives. So maybe you wanted to make like the background poster bigger or smaller, crop out extra figures if you want. So those are all options you can make. So here on the left, I made like a very basic kind of cliche. I just wanted to go for like a very recognizable movie poster. In the middle, I decided to get a little creative and simplify the color palette, the color scheme, which we talked about last time. So I just wanted to make it look a little bit more striking. So I went with the black and white background photo, and then just a minimalist sort of one tone for the figures. And then for my 3rd version, I wanted to look a little retro. If you've been looking at movie poster history, and I hope you have, with some of the resources that I've shared, or just looking at some of your own resources that you've found, you might see that movie posters have sort of different styles for the era. We talked about the old school movie posters from the silent era to the classic era that were hand painted, to the modern Photoshop movie posters now. But in the 60s and 70s, there was a particular style. The fonts became more modern looking compared to what they were before. Like it was kind of a lot of cursive writing before, and then they started going into like fonts that were very just modern, didn't have a lot of lines in them. So I kind of went with this font that sort of to me spoke to that style that was very popular in the 60s and 70s. And I also put a filter on the background photo. So if you're working in Photoshop, you can actually go in and apply different filters, or just play with the hue and saturation. You can add gradient filters. All of this was a few things I covered last week. We can also do this in Pixlr. Like these were all kind of options and ideas for you. All of those color options are things that you should consider when making your variations. The reason why I want you to make variations is because you have to please a client or your boss. This has happened to me in my own life, where I've made like a really nice I made some title cards one time. I worked really hard on them. I thought I did a good job, and my boss was like, "Oh, what else did you do?" Like thinking that I made more variations. So that was like one of the first things I learned, and hopefully, you'll be more prepared than I was. I got to the habit actually by the end of my working at that place, that I would sometimes have as many as 8 variations. That's being very extra. You don't have to do that, but I just got into a habit of just like playing around, just really being very, very creative, just like seeing every little option. What could I do? Can I move something a little bit to the left, to the right? What color can I use? Being as creative as I could be, to make sure that when I sent those options to my boss, that she saw something she liked, so just wanted to prepare you for a career and start thinking about these things now. What can you do with variations? So that's why I want you to have the 3 versions. I also have a very funny story of how I worked on different versions of an infographic, and we ended up not using it at all. So sometimes that happens too. Be prepared for that as well. Okay, so now the creative challenge, which is the final step. So producing your final work. So you need to go through I would like for you to go through a checklist to make sure that you have you have the variations that you want, that you sort of spell checked everything, what have you. Remember that for my requirements, I wanted you to use at least 2 images, at least 2. You could use much, much more. 2 to 3 fonts. So that was something I wanted you to look at a lot of fonts, because it's not always great graphic design to just do just one font. It can look a little bit too uniform. However, going past 3 fonts, it's like a rule of thumb. Like if you were to use more than 3 fonts, it's a little too much. It can be a little bit visually confusing. So I want you to pick like 2 to 3 fonts. And then, did you add all of the required text? So actor, tagline, title, credits. Make sure the image size meets the minimum requirements. That should be already posted. The right file type should be JPEG, and the appropriate file name. So those are all on the submission form. It actually tells you exactly how you should title your work, and you should be seeing V1, V2, V3 for version 1, version 2, version 3. Okay. So before we end this, I'd like to go back to Pixlr and show you a few other things about fonts because you can also, this is also for a variation. You can add effects to the fonts. So if you click here on the font, and you can see on the right that the layer is active if it's highlighted. Photoshop is the same way. There'll be layers on your right, because every part of the picture is a layer, right? The two images and each piece of text is its own layer. So you make sure the font that you want to kind of mess with is active. And you come up here to styles, and you can do all kinds of cool things like you can curve the text. That's a little confusing, so maybe we won't do that, but you could do that. You could do some background for the text. That's probably not the best thing. It'll be kind of like adding like a block behind it, but you can see how that looks. Doing an outline is really cool. This would be sort of like, it's almost kind of like adding weight to it to make them thicker. And then you could also do a drop shadow. This would be very helpful if you feel like the text is getting lost against the picture. It doesn't really stand out. You can add a drop shadow. Let's see. You have to kind of mess with the direction to find it a little bit. And the opacity should be low. And the color, oops, the color, let's go with the black. So that's another thing that you could try with your text. You could, over here on format is where you can do a left align or a right align. Make sure the text is adding to the composition. If there's a lot of balance if there's too much text on one side, maybe align the text, the next block of text to the other side. Consider also the readability. Remember that in English language, we read left to right. So that kind of means like we read the picture left to right usually as well. So consider where our eye is going. Here's also where you can kind of mess with the line spacing. You can make it the lines farther apart, and you can also make the letters farther apart as well. So these are all options that you should be considering, not only when completing your main version, but also for completing those variations as well. Right here under fill is where you can find different colors. So if you wanted black text, for example, you can change that. You can also add gradient text, but consider that that might also affect the readability. And right here is where you can edit the text if you want to type something different. So for Photoshop, there's even more options than this. So one thing you could do is take a look at some Photoshop tutorials of some titles that might lead you through doing things like adding texture, or doing things like adding an outer glow, or whatever you want to, or maybe you want to make your letters look like they're carved out of metal or gold. There's plenty of tutorials online that you could look for that lead you through all the Photoshop steps you need to take. Pixlr doesn't have as many options as that, so keep that in mind if you're working in Pixlr, that you might just want to just consider that simple text. But if you're really thinking about like branding and stuff like that, you might want to look into just how kind of extra you can be with your text. And really just have at it, just have fun with it. I've always had fun with my variations because it's very challenging to see like, okay, I like this version, but what can I change? What can I do differently? All right, so we are going to be taking these submissions until Friday, February 10th at 8 p.m. There is a link to a Google form where you could submit those JPEGs. Make sure you follow all the guidelines on the form. And then hopefully we'll see you at the Grid Festival, March 2023. So I really hope you have a wonderful time making your poster. And I really look forward to what you come up with. But just remember to have fun. Remember, like the text and things like that. Like those could be your friends' names, your family names, your pet names. But keep in mind also where we started. We started with something that was going to be personal to you or to your community. So keep in mind that you're telling a story that's important to you. And if it's important to you, then that's where you're really going to put your heart into it.